Hi, my name's Emily Smith. I'm the Environment Manager at the Angling Trust, and I've been invited here today to talk to you a bit about invasive species, what they are, and what we can do to try and stop them being introduced and spread into our water bodies. And also, if they are present, what we can do to try and tackle them. So I'll be focusing on for this bit on floating pennywort and signal crayfish, but if there's any other ones that you want to discuss, then just ask in the Q&A and I'll cover them at the end. So what are invasive species? They are any animal, plant or pathogen that has been introduced outside of their native range into a new environment, and in this location they end up having significant negative impacts. And this movement of species can occur by humans either intentionally or unintentionally. So intentional can be, for example, the introduction of a plant into a garden from which it then spreads, then knowingly introducing that plant itself. It can be the introduction of animals for use for the pet trade, but they can also occur unintentionally. So this might be, for example, in the soil that comes with that plant, you might have an insect or something burrowed away within that, and you weren't aware that that was there. It can also occur for recreational angling. So if you go fishing and you're using your nets in that water, you might accidentally get some plant material entangled in that. You go home, and then if you go to another water body, you could accidentally introduce that plant into that system. So there's a variety of different methods through which and pathways through which invasive species can be moved around. And at the moment, we estimate there's about 275 invasive species in Great Britain, and this number is continuing to increase. They currently cost about £1.7 billion to the economy every year, so they have a huge negative impact on the economy as well as on the environment themselves. So why should we care? What's the impact on us? So what can be done? What can we do? So there's three ways that the management of invasive species can be split up into these kind of three main themes. The first one and the key one is prevention. So this is stopping an invasive species arriving in the first place in a water body. And there's some really easy steps that everyone can take and you can implement within your fishery as well to try and encourage this best practice. And I'll come on to that in a minute. The second one is as yourself, because you're out on the bank very often, just learning to identify some of these key species, what they look like. And if you come across one, or if you come across something that's a bit unusual that you're not used to seeing, then just report it, because the sooner that happens, the sooner that they can get out if it is one of these kind of key species and contain it and hopefully stop it spreading, but also if they can, trying to then eradicate it if that is possible. And the third and final one is management. So this might be widespread species, and it's recognising that in these cases, unless they advance the techniques, it's unlikely that these are going to be eradicated. So it's really trying to control them, minimise them spreading further, and also minimise their impacts that they're having on our native fish and on our sport. So the first one of these is prevention. So this is adopting and encouraging the adoption of check, clean, dry. So it's these three really easy steps, and the reason for this is research has found that invasive species can survive for over 14 days in damp angling gear. So this means if you go fishing in one location and then you go to another within a fortnight, of which about 80% of anglers have stated that they do, then there is that risk of, without meaning to, spreading invasive species, a disease, into a new location. However, fortunately, the check, clean, dry is shown here. These three steps, research has shown, can result in 99% mortality of these species. So this is basically when you're at the bank, just making sure you check your gear, you remove any visible plant material, any mud, and leaving that at the bank. Then as soon as possible when you get home, or if they've got facilities there, making sure that you clean your equipment thoroughly, ideally using hot water, because hot water has been shown that that will kill off the invasive species and the plants and the diseases. But if that's not available, then using cold water as well. And then the final step is drying. So this is really critical, particularly if you've only used cold water in the first step. But also if you have used hot water, it's still key to do that anyway, because this will give that final whack and ensure that anything that has potentially survived the first 2 steps is then killed in this final step. And so there's very easy ways of trying to encourage the adoption of this best practice. So we can provide at the Angling Trust signs that can be put up at fisheries or in any kind of areas along the bank. And we can send these out to you. And these have been designed for coarse game and marine anglers. So there's you can ask for whichever one is the most relevant to you. Another thing that we encourage is that you include the check, clean, dry within your fishing rules if you have any of them present at your fishery or your club. So this will be, for example, asking anglers to arrive with dry nets, making sure that they follow the check, clean, dry. So again, it's just trying to encourage the adoption of that practice, because the more people that do it, the lower the risk of spreading invasive species around. So we've talked about using the check, clean, dry, encouraging that with people coming to and leaving the site, but there's also other areas of work that you might be undertaking where you can consider this. So for example, if you're doing any management on the lake that needs a requirement from a boat, just making sure that you are cleaning and drying that after if it's being used elsewhere. Similarly, if you're doing any stocking of fish, maybe trying to reduce the amount of extra water they're introducing from that other location, just in case there might be any plant material, any insects, invertebrates, those kind of things potentially present in there, if that is possible and feasible. And the other one is if you're doing any production of any refuges, if you're doing any installing anything with plants, making sure that you're using native plants wherever possible. Just so you're aware of what is kind of entering your site. And also, again, if you're doing anything with regard to maintenance, just making sure that you are cleaning and drying your boots and anything else that is coming into contact with water, and just making sure you're implementing that best practice wherever you can. And I just wanted to highlight this really before we go on to the other management types. I've talked a lot and we'll be talking a lot about species that are present in the UK, but there's also a whole suite of them that are knocking on the door to try and arrive. Particular ones are of interest are the round goby, which we want to keep out. So this is in Western Europe. This species is highly aggressive. Again, it can predate on on fish eggs and will outcompete other native fish species. So it's a big one of concern for us. And also the salmon fluke. So this is currently present in Norway and has, in the catchments where it's been found, has affected 98% of their salmon within 5 years. And unfortunately, in this case, the only way to manage it is through using chemicals, using rotenone, as you can see here. So obviously has huge consequences through the decimation almost of that catchment, because they have to do multiple treatments. So this is one where it can survive, the parasite can survive for 4 to 7 days on damp equipment out of water. So if we really want to stop these species coming, so I know it's not possible at the moment with the current restrictions, but it's that thing of whenever you're going abroad, making sure that you're following these steps as well, just to try and stop any of these other species and diseases kind of arriving in the UK. So moving on to reporting and kind of early detection. As I said, there's some really great guides, which we have some on the Angling Trust website that you can go and look at. So these covering species in the aquatic environment that you might come across whilst you're out on the bank. But there's also a whole host of other guides that are on non-native species secretariat website, which go through what key features you should be looking for, how this compares to native species so you can distinguish between them. And then once you're aware of that, it means that you can go through and you can report these species if you come across them. So the sooner they're reported, as I said earlier, the more likely it is that we can try and contain these species and stop them spreading elsewhere, and if possible, trying to remove them and eradicate them. So when you come across a species, the best way to report it is through iRecord. So this you can get either online or you can get it on your phone. So the key thing is to take a really good quality photo of that species, just so then when it gets looked at and it can be verified as quickly as possible. So I've included a link there. So this is where you can go and you can see the page there. And all you do is you can log in, you note your location, and then the date. And as I said, you upload that photo and you submit that. So that will then go off to the relevant individuals who can then act upon it. You can also report it to your local EA fisheries officer if it is a priority species that should be dealt with. So moving on to management. So the first one I wanted to cover was signal crayfish. So this is one of the species that I get asked about the most. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the impact that this species has on our native fish species. So the fact that there's a significant negative correlation between the presence of signal crayfish and fish densities. Because they predate on juvenile fish and eggs, they outcompete them for food, and they also have impacts by burrowing into the banks, which can undermine them, undercut them, but also means that you get a lot of suspended sediment entering the water body. So then it's coming on to what options available for us to try and manage the species. Unfortunately, at present, there's nothing out there that will result in the eradication of this species from our waterways. However, there are different options and some are still being developed and researched further into what we can do to try and at least minimise the impacts as much as possible. So the main one that we have at the moment is trapping. And there is some updates to trapping and the licenses that you acquire on the 1st December 2019, so last year. So I thought I'd just go and cover them quite quickly before I go on to the options and some of the limitations and advantages of some of them. So if you want to trap in England and Wales, you require a trapping authorisation. So this would be from the Environment Agency in England and from NRW in Wales. And as part of this, you'll be asked about exclusion and containment zones. This is just an update in terminology, which was formerly called no-go. So that is now exclusion zone, and go, which is now called a containment zone. So this is still based on the postcard system that they used, which is kind of looking into and should be based on the distribution of signal crayfish. So I've attached this map here, which kind of shows it, but I should also point out they are updating this at the moment. So this will change at some point, though we're not sure when that will be. So this is still being used at present. The important things to note in relation to the changes is if you are applying for a trapping authorisation, you are now required as part of that licence to remove all the individuals that you capture in that trap. So before you used to maybe capture, maybe put some back potentially, but now under the license you have to kill all of the ones that you capture, so even the small species. So this is to try and improve and reduce that impact of just capturing larger species, which will then release, potentially release the predation on the smaller species. So it's trying to get around that. Also, under this trapping authorisation, you have to kill all the individuals at the bank then and there. You cannot take them live away from the site. So this is quite a big change, and this is hopefully trying to reduce the potential for unintentional movement or spread of crayfish around waters. So this is whoever gets this licence will be required to do this. If you wish, and this applies to say commercials, to get a licence to take them away live, you have to apply from Natural England for a management licence. So this allows you then to transfer, and again it will be all those individuals that are captured, so this will be the large individuals, the small ones, off-site alive to be taken to containment processing plants, which are present in containment areas, where they will all be killed before they are then sent out around the country. We have a link or some more information on our website, so you can go in there just to find out a little bit more about that, and I can take any questions on that at the end, but I just really wanted to highlight that before going on and covering trapping in more detail. So for the traps themselves, the most common one that I see and are used are which is baited traps. So these are really great at getting large numbers of crayfish. So you're reducing the populations that are present in the water body. However, they are biased to larger individuals. So even though that means that you might be capturing those that are having the greatest potential impact on the water body and on the fish populations, it also means that they are predating less on the other smaller crayfish in the water that haven't been captured as part of this trap, which means that if that activity, if you stop trapping that intensively, then the population can almost come back very rapidly and maybe potentially larger numbers than before. So this is where it's important when you consider things such as commercials. This is limitation on this. If they stop coming and trapping, if it becomes uneconomical for them, then unfortunately, then you might see the population numbers return unless that trapping activity is kept up. So another option that has come in and is used are these artificial refuge traps. So it's shown in B here. So the idea with this is that they're smaller areas where you can get the smaller crayfish that can go in. Some of the females go into these areas, and then it's almost a refuge from them, from the bigger males. So then you can go in and hopefully try and capture and remove some of these as well. The issue with these ones is you generally have to leave them in for longer, just in order to encourage them to be colonised by these crayfish. And obviously they can come and go compared to the trap in A, where once they're in there, they're kind of stuck there. So this means that numbers that you get overall are lower. However, some places use a kind of dual approach, and this is shown to be work quite well at trying to get those smaller population sizes. So at the Angling Trust, we've done some work to develop this, recognising that there are still limitations in this area and it still needs to be developed a lot more. So we did some work with CFAS on this, and there's this paper that is included there, which covers some of the work that was done in trying to improve traps. And it has shown that the population numbers significantly decreased over a couple of years. However, again, it's that thing of, it's not eradicating them, it's just trying to get them down to numbers where it's minimising their impact that they're having on the fishery. And this is recognised as it's on enclosed waters. In open systems, it's a lot more complicated, and work is still being ongoing to try and work out what methods and options we can have on this. And one that is emerging at the moment is around male sterilisation, as you can see in the image here. So the idea then is that with the larger males that have been sterilised, they can be returned back into the water, where they're then acting still as predating on those smaller individuals, so almost acting to help control the populations themselves. So this research is still ongoing, but is working progress in the southwest, and some of the preliminary results that are coming out seem quite positive on that. So it's something we'll be looking into further going forward. Moving on to the next species is floating pennywort. So again, this is one that you might have come across a lot, particularly if you're based in the southeast of England. And this is a species that a plant that creates these huge dense mats across the water, shown in the image here. It can grow up to 20 centimetres a day, so that's a metre every 5 days, and that's just one strand. So you can see how it can quickly double in size and create these big mats across the water that have huge impacts on fish populations, and also impacting our ability to fish, because you just can't cast into these areas. So you can get, as I said, just a tiny fragment such as this, very small, could be the size of your finger, could be quite hard to spot, can quickly turn into something like this. And floating pennywort is a species that we're very concerned about and have been calling for more strategic management of this species, looking at it at catchment scale rather than ad hoc. here and there piecemeal work that's been going on in the past. And because of this, in September 2020, so just gone, the Thames Basin Pilot was launched. So this is looking at undertaking a catchment approach to management of floating pennywort. So this builds upon some really great work that's been going on in the River Kennet over the last 3 years, and we have a video that we can show at the end which looked at how we can work together in partnership. So this is using the Environment Agency, but also ourselves as anglers, what we can do to try and work together to manage this more effectively. So this basically uses the resources of the EA, using their boats and their booms, so they can go out and manage the huge stands that we just aren't capable of doing ourselves, liaising with us on this, and then us as clubs, we can be there to go out afterward and potentially mop up, I've called it, but going out and just picking up and removing the smaller stands. And so this work we're hoping to carry on in the winter and be really doing a lot of work in this in the spring and summer next year, with the plan of, once this guidance and best practice has been developed, being able to expand this and promote it nationally in May next year. And this just shows here an example. This is the River Kennet that I referred to, and this shows what it was like before in 2017, and this is after. So this is when I went there in September, just to see what progress has been made. So that, come on to my final slide. There's only a couple of species that I covered there in management, so if you have any others, then please ask, and whether I can answer your question or I can direct you to some guidance, then I'm more than happy to do so. I just want to finish these 5 points here really on things that we can all do after this meeting to take home and look at, to familiarise ourselves with high priority invasive species, so we know what we're looking for, but also to help with trying to reduce their spread into other water bodies. So if anyone's interested in having a sign, then please get in touch and we can get one sent out for you for free. There's also lots of other check clean dry materials out there. There's some stickers and some guidance as well if you're undertaking any competitions. Also encourage any of you that are interested in more information. There's this free online e-learning module, so it goes through lots of things. So there's more on biosecurity, more on invasive species themselves, so that's there as another option. And as I said already, those guides which are available on the Non-Native Species Secretariat website, or we also have some on the Angling Trust page. Okay, thank you very much.